The invitation had arrived unexpectedly, delivered in a shimmering silver envelope that hummed faintly in his hands. It was addressed simply to our honored guest from Earth. No return address, no sender. For a moment, he thought it might be some kind of prank, but as he unfolded the delicate letter inside, the words glowed faintly, almost alive. You are cordially invited to the union ceremony of the House of Aril, to be held on D. Balon Prime. Your presence would honor our traditions and strengthen the bond between our worlds. He had no idea who the House of Aril was, or why an ordinary human like him had been invited to what appeared to be an alien wedding. Maybe it was a mistake, a mix-up in the interstellar diplomatic channels. But curiosity and the thought of being part of something so unique got the better of him. 2 weeks later, he found himself standing on the pearlescent surface of Divalon Prime, the air alive with scents that didn't exist on Earth and colors so vibrant they seemed to hum in his vision. The wedding venue towered before him, an intricate crystalline structure that sparkled like 1,000 sunsets compressed into a single moment. Beings of all shapes and sizes milled around, their alien forms draped in flowing garments that shimmered and shifted like liquid light. He felt out of place in his formal Earth suit, a sharp contrast to the ethereal elegance of the alien attendees. Still, he reminded himself he was here to observe, to soak in the experience of an intergalactic cultural exchange. After all, how many humans could say they'd attended an alien wedding? A tall figure approached him, their elongated form graceful yet imposing. The alien's face, framed by delicate silver fronds, seemed both unreadable and welcoming. "Welcome, guest from Earth," they said, their voice resonating like a soft chime. "We are honored by your presence. The House of Aril has prepared a place of great distinction for you." He nodded, trying not to appear overwhelmed. "Thank you. It's an honor to be here." The figure led him through the crowd, introducing him to various dignitaries and guests. Most of them seemed fascinated by his humanity, peppering him with polite questions about Earth and its customs. He answered as best as he could, though he often felt like a zoo exhibit under the intensity of their gazes. As the ceremony began, he took his place in a seat of honor, front and center. The hall's crystalline walls began to glow, bathing everyone in a warm, golden light. Music that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his chest filled the air. It was beautiful, otherworldly, and utterly mesmerizing. The bride or brides, as it turned out, entered the hall in a procession of flowing colors and light. There were 6 of them, each representing a different lineage within the House of Aril. Their appearances were vastly different, yet each was stunning in their own way. One had skin that shimmered like a starry sky. He found himself clapping along with the other guests, marveling at the grandeur of it all. The brides took their places at the front of the hall, and a robed officiant began to speak in a melodic alien tongue. He couldn't understand the words, but their rhythm and cadence were hypnotic. Then something strange happened. The officiant paused, looking directly at him. The hall grew quiet, and he felt every eye in the room turned toward him. "Guest from Earth," the officiant said, their voice amplified and solemn. "You have come here as a symbol of unity and trust. Your presence honors us greatly. But today, you shall not only witness this sacred ceremony, you shall become a part of it." His heart stopped. "Excuse me," he managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. The officiant's expression, or what he assumed was an expression, was serene, almost amused. "It is the will of the House of Aril. By your consent, you shall be joined in union with the daughters of our lineage. binding our people in eternal harmony. He blinked, certain he'd misunderstood. "I think there's been some kind of mistake," he stammered. "I wasn't told." The robed figure who had greeted him earlier stepped forward. "There is no mistake," they said gently. "The invitation was clear, though perhaps your earth customs led you to interpret it differently. Among our people, to be invited as an honored guest is to be considered a potential bondmate." His mind raced. Bondmate? Marriage? To all of them? This had to be some kind of cultural miscommunication, a monumental, intergalactic misunderstanding. I don't think I can agree to that," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "This is a little sudden." The officiant tilted their head, the glow of the room dimming slightly as murmurs spread among the guests. The brides exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. "It is not our custom to pressure a guest," the robed figure said, their tone calm but firm. "However, to refuse at this moment would be seen as a grave dishonor. It would fracture the bond we hope to create and bring shame to the house of Orill." His stomach churned. He hadn't come here to cause an interstellar incident, but neither had he signed up for this. The weight of 1,000 eyes bore down on him, and the hall's once warm glow now felt suffocating. I need to think," he said, his voice barely audible. The officiant nodded slowly. "You shall have a moment. But remember, guest from Earth, every choice carries its consequences." He felt the tension in the room like a physical force as he stepped back, his thoughts a chaotic mess. He hadn't even begun to process what this meant for him or for Earth. The stakes were far greater than himself, and the pressure to make the right decision was overwhelming. As he stood there, grappling with his options, he couldn't shake the feeling that his presence here wasn't as accidental as it seemed. This wasn't just a wedding, it was something far bigger, a piece of a puzzle he didn't yet understand. And he was right in the middle of it. As he stood there, the room buzzing with quiet murmurs, he couldn't help but replay the series of events that had brought him here. The invitation, the travel to D. Valon Prime, the endless introductions, everything had felt strange yet harmless, like stepping into a vivid dream. But now, it was something else entirely. It was a weight he couldn't ignore, a decision he hadn't signed up for, but somehow found himself trapped within. He scanned the room, searching for any hint of an escape, some way to stall or defuse the situation. The brides stood at the altar, their forms glowing faintly, watching him with expressions he couldn't decipher. Their beauty, while undeniable, was alien in every sense of the word. How could he be expected to marry even one of them, let alone all of them? The officiant remained still, their hands folded in a gesture that seemed patient yet unyielding. The robed figure who had greeted him earlier stepped closer, their voice low and almost conspiratorial. "We understand this is sudden for you," they said, their tone soft but unwavering. "Your customs differ from ours, but you must understand the significance of this ceremony. The House of Orill is one of the oldest and most powerful in this quadrant. To bond with them is to secure not just a union, but an alliance that could benefit Earth in ways you cannot yet imagine." "An alliance?" he echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I'm just a guy from Earth. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a politician. Why me?" The figure's fronds shifted slightly, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as a sign of thoughtfulness. "Perhaps that is precisely why you were chosen. Your simplicity, your sincerity, they are qualities our people value deeply." The House of Rill believes in unity, in forging bonds not through power or conquest, but through trust. You represent that to them." He shook his head, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "But I didn't agree to this. This wasn't part of the deal. I thought I was just here to witness a wedding, not become a part of it." The figure tilted their head, their glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Did you not read the invitation carefully? Among our people, words carry weight beyond their surface meaning. To accept the invitation was to accept the possibility of union. It is our way." He felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. Had he missed something that obvious? Or was this all just a way to back him into a corner, using tradition as a means to manipulate him? As if sensing his inner turmoil, the figure stepped back, giving him space. "We will not force you," they said. "But understand this, a refusal will ripple far beyond this hall. The House of Rill does not offer its hand lightly, and a rejection would be unprecedented." He swallowed hard, the weight of those words settling on him. "And if I say yes?" The figure's gaze softened. "Then you become a part of something greater than yourself. You will share in their legacy, their influence, their power. You will be a bridge between Earth and our people. But most of all, you will be honored and cherished by the House of Rill." The word cherished hung in the air, its meaning both comforting and suffocating. He wasn't ready for this. How could anyone be? But the alternative felt equally unbearable. To be the reason Earth lost its chance at a powerful ally, to carry the burden of that failure, was almost too much to bear. He turned his attention back to the brides, their glowing forms still and patient. Their eyes, if they could be called eyes, seemed to shimmer with something unspoken. Was it hope? Curiosity? Or were they as uncertain about this union as he was? Before he could dwell on it further, the officiant raised their hands, signaling for silence. The murmurs in the hall ceased instantly, and all eyes returned to him. "Have you reached a decision, guest from Earth?" the officiant asked, their voice ringing with authority. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His mind was a whirlwind of doubt, fear, and questions. He needed more time, more information, anything to make sense of the situation. I need to understand more," he said finally, his voice trembling slightly. "Why was I really chosen? What happens if I agree or if I don't?" The officiant regarded him for a moment before nodding. "Your questions are valid. The House of Rill values clarity and understanding. We shall provide you with the answers you seek, though time is of the essence." The robed figure gestured for him to follow, leading him out of the main hall and into a smaller, more intimate chamber. The walls here were lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and move as he walked past, telling stories he couldn't quite grasp. The figure turned to him, their expression, if it could be called that, both serious and calm. "The House of Rill seeks union not out of convenience, but necessity. Their line has faced challenges, fractures that threaten their standing in the galaxy. By joining with you, they hope to solidify their position, to show that they are capable of forging alliances even beyond the stars." He frowned, his mind racing. "So this isn't just about me or Earth. It's about their survival." The figure inclined their head. "In part. But it is also about growth, about reaching beyond the confines of tradition. You are more than a symbol. You are a chance for renewal, for something entirely new." He ran a hand through his hair, the enormity of it all pressing down on him. "And if I say no?" The figure's gaze darkened slightly. It would be seen as a rejection, not just of the House of Arill, but of the values they stand for. It would send a message that Earth is unwilling to embrace unity, that it fears what lies beyond its borders. The consequences could be significant. He exhaled slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd come here thinking this was just another adventure, another story to tell back home. But now, it felt like the weight of two worlds was resting on his shoulders. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure stepped closer, their tone gentle yet firm. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. You have been given a choice, one that will shape the future of more than just yourself. The question is, what legacy will you leave behind?" He stared at the shifting carvings on the walls, their stories flowing like rivers of light. Somewhere in their ever-changing forms, he thought he saw a reflection of himself, small, uncertain, but standing tall against the vastness of the unknown. The figure watched him silently, waiting for his response. But deep down, he knew there were no easy answers. Not for this. The chamber seemed to close in around him, the glowing carvings on the walls shifting more rapidly, their intricate patterns almost dizzying. His guide stood silently, giving him space to process everything, but their presence only added to the weight pressing on his chest. His thoughts churned as he tried to reconcile what was being asked of him. It wasn't just a choice, it was a pivotal moment, not just for him, but potentially for Earth and an entire alien civilization. Back in the Grand Hall, the murmurs of the crowd had grown louder, the tension palpable even through the walls. He could feel the collective anticipation of the guests waiting for his decision, their curiosity mingling with something heavier expectation. They weren't just waiting for an answer. They were waiting for a verdict that would ripple through their lives as much as his own. He turned to his guide, his voice strained. "If I agree, will they even want me? Do they understand how different I am, how unprepared I am for any of this?" The alien's fronds shifted, their glow softening slightly. "They are aware of your differences, but they do not see them as flaws. The brides of the House of Arill are not bound by the constraints of what you call love in its narrowest sense. To them, this union is about partnership, mutual respect, and the possibilities that arise when two worlds connect. They believe in your potential, even if you do not yet see it yourself." The words offered some comfort, but only briefly. He still couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about him or the brides. There was more at play here, something larger, something he couldn't quite grasp. As they re-entered the Grand Hall, the room fell silent once more. The brides stood waiting, their glowing forms as still as statues. Their eyes, or the shimmering points that seemed to function as eyes, were fixed on him, unblinking. He felt a strange mix of awe and trepidation, as if he were standing before the edge of a vast, unknown abyss. The officiant's voice broke the silence, resonating through the hall like a soft chime. "Guest from Earth, you have sought clarity, and we have offered it. Now, the moment has come. Will you accept the union and take your place among the House of Arill, or will you decline, knowing the weight of such a decision?" His heart raced, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He could feel every eye in the room on him, their gazes heavy with expectation, curiosity, and perhaps even judgment. Before he could speak, one of the brides stepped forward. Her form shimmered like starlight, and her voice, though soft, carried through the hall with ease. "We understand your hesitation," she said, her tone calm but laced with something deeper. "You were not born into our ways, and the choice before you is not one we take lightly. But know this, we do not seek perfection. We seek connection, a chance to build something greater than ourselves." Her words struck a chord, though he couldn't explain why. There was an openness in her tone, a sincerity that cut through the chaos in his mind. He glanced at the other brides, each of them watching him with expressions he couldn't fully decipher. They weren't pressuring him, but they weren't indifferent either. He took a shaky breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "What happens if I fail?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The bride tilted her head, her shimmering eyes unwavering. "Failure is a part of growth. To try and falter is better than to never try at all. If you choose this path, you will not walk it alone. We will guide you as you will guide us." The room felt impossibly still, the air heavy with anticipation. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the sheer enormity of what was being asked. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to turn and run, to escape the pressure and uncertainty. But something held him there, rooted in place. As he stood on the brink of a decision that would shape his future, and possibly the future of Earth, he couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to this than what had been said. He thought of the invitation, the strange phrasing, the way everything had been orchestrated to lead to this moment. It was as if the House of Arill had known he would be here, that he would hesitate, that he would ask these questions. The officiant's voice cut through his thoughts, gentle but firm. "The choice is yours, guest from Earth. But the time has come to decide." His palms were clammy, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. The crowd was silent, their collective gaze heavy and expectant. The brides waited, their forms glowing softly in the golden light of the hall. He felt the weight of their hope, their trust, and their uncertainty, all mingling with his own. For a moment, he closed his eyes, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The image of Earth flashed in his mind, its oceans, its skies, its people. He thought of the potential this union could bring, the bridges it could build, the futures it could shape. But he also thought of the risks, the unknowns, the possibility of failure. When he opened his eyes, the room seemed brighter, the light almost blinding. The officiant waited, the brides waited, and the crowd waited, all holding their collective breath. The moment had come. Just as he drew a breath to speak, a sound cut through the stillness, a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the walls and seemed to echo in his chest. The crowd shifted uneasily, their gazes darting toward the crystalline doors of the hall, which now pulsed with a faint, ominous light. The officiants stiffened, their serene composure breaking for the first time. A sharp, melodic tone rang out, and the robed figure who had guided him earlier moved swiftly toward the doors, their fronds bristling with what he could only describe as agitation. "This is unexpected," they murmured, their voice low but tense. The hum grew louder, and the golden glow of the hall began to dim, replaced by a flickering, almost dissonant light. The brides exchanged glances, their calm exteriors betraying flickers of unease. One of them stepped forward, her shimmering form momentarily brighter than the rest. "It is them," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that sent a chill down his spine. Before he could ask what she meant, the doors burst open, sending a wave of cold, sharp air rushing through the hall. Standing in the threshold was a group of figures cloaked in shadows, their outlines barely visible against the flickering light. They stepped forward in unison, their movements precise and unnervingly silent. The officiant raised their hands, their voice ringing out with authority. "This is a sacred ceremony of the House of Arill. State your purpose or depart." One of the shadowed figures stepped forward, their voice deep and reverberating. The house of a rill dares much, reaching beyond its own to bind itself to the fragile and the unknown. We are here to remind you of the consequences. The crowd erupted into whispers, their fear palpable. He stood frozen, his mind racing as he tried to piece together what was happening. Who were these intruders? What did they want? The bride who had spoken earlier turned to him, her voice urgent. These are the Vraren, rivals of our house. They have long sought to undermine our ways, and they see this union as a threat to their power. Why? He asked, his voice barely steady. Because it represents something they fear, she said, her gaze steady. Change. The lead figure's voice cut through the murmurs. This is folly. A human cannot stand among us, cannot uphold the bonds you seek to forge. Your arrogance will bring ruin to us all. The officiant stepped forward, their tone defiant. The house of a rill will not be swayed by fear or threats. This union represents hope, not folly. The Vran figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Hope is a fragile thing, easily shattered. You gamble your legacy on an outsider who does not even understand the weight of his own presence here. All eyes turned to him once more, but this time the weight felt different. It wasn't just expectation or curiosity, it was something sharper, more dangerous. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken challenge hanging between the two factions. Why are they so afraid of me? He asked, his voice rising above the murmurs. The bride's gaze flickered with something he couldn't quite place, pride, perhaps, or determination. Because you are not bound by their rules or their traditions. You are an unknown, and the unknown terrifies those who cling to power. The lead Vrayan stepped closer, their shadowed form looming over him. Do you even understand what you are, human? Do you know why you were truly brought here? The question hit him like a blow, and for a moment he couldn't find his voice. He turned to the officiant, then to his guide, searching for answers in their unreadable faces. What does he mean? He asked, his voice trembling. Why was I chosen? The officiant hesitated, their hands folding in front of them. You were chosen because you represent something greater than yourself. Your presence here is a symbol of unity, but it is also a catalyst. A catalyst for what? Before the officiant could answer, the lead Vran stepped forward, their voice cutting through the air like a blade. For war. For chaos. The house of a rill seeks to upend the balance of power, to disrupt centuries of stability with their reckless ambition. And they are using you to do it. The hall erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as the crowd reacted to the accusation. He felt the ground beneath him shift, the weight of the moment growing heavier with every word. Could it be true? Was he just a pawn in a game far beyond his understanding? The bride stepped closer to him, her voice calm but urgent. Do not listen to their lies. They twist the truth to serve their own ends. This union is about more than politics. It is about survival for all of us. He stared at her, then at the shadowed figures, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and confusion. The stakes had risen far beyond anything he could have imagined, and the pressure to make the right choice felt suffocating. The lead Vran spoke again, their voice a low, menacing growl. Choose carefully, human. Your decision will not only shape your fate, but the fate of this galaxy. And once made, it cannot be undone. The room fell silent once more, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. He stood there, caught between two forces he barely understood, the weight of their words crushing him. The world around him seemed to blur. The faces of the brides, the crowd, and the Vryan all blending together into a swirling maelstrom of uncertainty. The officiant's voice broke through the haze, firm and steady. "The choice is yours, guest from Earth. But remember, every choice carries its cost." He looked at the brides, their glowing forms filled with hope and determination. He looked at the Vryan, their shadowed figures radiating menace and defiance. And for the first time, he realized that no matter what he chose, there would be no turning back. The hall felt impossibly quiet as the tension reached its breaking point. His heart pounded in his chest, and he realized that every choice, every word, would carry consequences he could barely comprehend. He took a step forward, breaking the invisible barrier that had held him still. Every eye followed his movement, the weight of expectation pressing down like a physical force. "I didn't come here to cause harm," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "I didn't even know what I was stepping into, but now that I'm here, I see what's at stake. This isn't just about me or your traditions. This is about what kind of future you want to build. So I'll make my choice, but I need the truth first." He turned toward the officiant, his gaze firm. "Why me? No more riddles, no more veiled answers. Tell me everything." The officiant hesitated, their shimmering presence dimming slightly, as though weighed down by the moment. Finally, they spoke, their voice resonant. "You were chosen because you are unlike any of us. Your kind has an unyielding spirit, a resilience that defies reason. The House of Aril believes that forging a bond with such a being could unlock a strength neither of our worlds has ever known." The lead Vryan scoffed, their shadowed forms shifting like smoke. "Strength or chaos? You gamble with forces you cannot control." But the bride who had spoken earlier stepped forward again, her presence radiant with resolve. "It is not chaos we seek, but change. Your fear blinds you to what could be achieved. This union is not about dominance. It is about possibility." He took another breath, turning his focus to the Vryan leader. "And what about you? Why do you care so much? What are you really afraid of?" The Vryan leader's shadow seemed to ripple, their voice growing colder. "You do not understand the cost of what they ask. The House of Aril seeks to disrupt the balance, to pull power toward themselves under the guise of unity. And you, human, are the key to their plans. If you agree, you will not bring peace, you will ignite conflict across the stars." His mind raced, caught between the conflicting truths. Both sides claimed to seek the greater good, but the stakes felt impossibly high. Was he a tool for change or a pawn in a larger game? He felt the weight of every gaze in the room, from the hopeful brides to the defiant Vryan, and even the crowd who seemed torn between anticipation and fear. Then, in a moment of clarity, he realized the answer wasn't in their words. It was in their actions. The House of Aril had welcomed him, despite his differences, and offered guidance. The Vryan had entered uninvited, their approach built on threats and fear. The choice became clearer, even if the risks remained. "I'll do it," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "I'll stand with the House of Aril, not because I know what the future holds, but because I believe in what it could be." The hall erupted in gasps and whispers, the bride's glowing forms brightening with what he could only interpret as joy. The officiant nodded, their hands raised in acknowledgement, while the Vryan leader's shadow seemed to darken, their presence growing heavier. You've made your choice, the Vran leader said, their tone low and dangerous. But do not think this is the end. You may have aligned yourself with them, but the consequences of your decision will reach far beyond this moment. Before he could respond, the Vrayan figures retreated as quickly as they had come, their forms dissolving into the flickering shadows of the hall. The doors slammed shut behind them, leaving an unsettling quiet in their wake. The officiant stepped forward, their voice calm but firm. The union must be completed. Step forward, guest from Earth. As he moved toward the altar, the glowing carvings on the walls seemed to shift again, but this time their patterns were different, less chaotic, more harmonious. The brides surrounded him, their presence both comforting and overwhelming. The ceremony proceeded, the words spoken in a language he didn't fully understand but felt in his core. Just as the final phrase was uttered, a surge of energy coursed through the room, a luminous wave that seemed to bind him to the brides and the house of Arill itself. The crowd erupted in cheers, their joy filling the hall, but he barely heard them. The connection he felt was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, an overwhelming sense of unity, of belonging, but also of responsibility. And then, as the light began to fade and the hall settled into quiet celebration, a voice echoed in his mind, not his own, but unfamiliar and vast. You have taken the first step, human, but the path ahead will test you beyond measure. Are you ready? He froze, glancing around the hall, but no one else seemed to have heard it. The brides looked at him, their expressions calm, yet knowing, as though they understood what had just happened, but chose not to explain. For now, at least. The officiant smiled, their glow returning to full brilliance. The union is complete. The future begins now. But as he stood there, surrounded by cheers and celebration, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Vryan's warning wasn't just empty rhetoric. The voice in his mind lingered, a reminder that the story wasn't over, was just beginning. The hall slowly began to empty as the crowd dispersed, their excitement carrying them out into the glowing corridors of the house of Arill. Yet amidst the celebrations, he stood frozen, his mind spinning with questions that refused to settle. The weight of his decision pressed harder now that the immediate threat had passed, and he couldn't ignore the quiet unease lingering beneath the surface. The brides remained close, their forms a calming presence, though their silence left him feeling oddly exposed. One of them, the same who had spoken earlier with such conviction, stepped forward. Her voice was softer now, as though she sensed his unease. You did well, she said. The choice you made took courage. He nodded but didn't reply immediately. Instead, he found himself looking toward the doors, where the Vryan had disappeared. Their warning echoed in his mind, mingling with the strange voice that had spoken to him during the ceremony. What happens now? He finally asked, his tone uncertain. The bride tilted her head, her glow dimming slightly. Now we begin to build the future we envisioned. Together. The simplicity of her answer did little to ease his concern. He glanced at the officiant, who remained nearby, their expression serene but unreadable. And the Vryan? They're not just going to let this go, are they? The officiant stepped forward, their hands folding neatly in front of them. The Vryan have always resisted change. They fear what they cannot control, but their power lies in fear and division. The union you have created today is a step towards something stronger, something they cannot break so easily. He wanted to believe them, but the memory of the Vryan leader's shadowy presence lingered, heavy and oppressive. They said this union would bring war, The officiant's glow flickered, a subtle sign of their hesitation. Conflict may come, but it is not inevitable. The path forward depends on the choices we make from here. The brides exchanged glances, their silent communication a reminder of how deeply connected they were to each other and now to him. One of them reached out, her hand or what passed for a hand hovering just shy of his arm. "We will stand with you," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Her words, though comforting, only added to the complexity of what he was feeling. This wasn't just about him anymore. He had become a part of something far larger than himself, a thread woven into a tapestry he didn't fully understand. As the celebration continued around them, he allowed himself a moment to take it all in. The grandeur of the hall, the warmth of the bride's presence, the strange yet mesmerizing harmony of the house of a rill. It was beautiful in a way that defied description, but it was also overwhelming, a reminder of just how far from home he truly was. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the hall grew quieter, he found himself walking through the corridors with one of the brides by his side. Her glow was softer now, almost muted, as if she were trying to make him feel at ease. "You have questions," she said, her tone gentle. He nodded. "A lot of them. Like, why me, really? I get what the officiant said about resilience, but there has to be more to it. And what about that voice? During the ceremony, I heard something. It wasn't anyone in the room." She paused, her glowing form still. "The voice you heard is the heart of a rill. It is difficult to explain. It is not alive as you understand life, but it is a consciousness born from the collective will of our people. It chose you, just as we did." He frowned, trying to process her words. "So this heart, it's watching me. Guiding me?" "In a way," she said. "It is not something to fear. It exists to preserve and protect. But it has also been dormant for many cycles, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Your presence was that moment." Her explanation answered some questions, but raised others. He looked at her, searching her expression for any hint of uncertainty. "And what happens if I mess up? If I can't live up to what's expected?" Her gaze softened, her light brightening slightly. "You misunderstand. This is not about perfection. It is about effort, about growth. We do not expect you to have all the answers. We only ask that you walk this path with us, step by step." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a lot to take in." She nodded. "It is. But you are not alone." The days that followed were a blur of introductions, rituals, and moments of quiet reflection. He began to learn more about the House of Aril and its history, about the intricate balance of power that governed this alien society. The brides became his guides, their patience and insight helping him navigate the complexities of his new role. Yet the shadow of the Vrian loomed over everything. Reports came in of their movements, whispers of their plans to disrupt the fragile peace that had been forged. The tension was palpable, a constant undercurrent that threatened to unravel everything they had worked toward. One evening, as he stood on a balcony overlooking the glowing expanse of the House of Aril, the same bride who had been by his side since the beginning joined him. She stood silently for a moment before speaking. "You're thinking about them." He nodded. "I can't help it. They're not going to stop, are they?" "No," she admitted. "But neither will we." He turned to her, his expression serious. "What if they're right? What if this union causes more harm than good?" She met his gaze, her light steady and unwavering. "Change always brings uncertainty. But without it, there can be no progress. The Vryan fear what they cannot control, but that fear is not our burden to carry. Our task is to move forward, to build something better. Her words resonated with him, though they didn't erase his doubts. He looked out over the city, the glowing lights reflecting the quiet determination of the House of Arill. I hope you're right. As the days turned into weeks, the first signs of conflict began to emerge. The Vryan launched a series of calculated strikes, targeting key outposts and alliances connected to the House of Arill. The attacks were swift and brutal, designed to sow fear and destabilize their growing coalition. But the House of Arill did not falter. They responded with a calm resolve, rallying their allies and reinforcing their defenses. And at the center of it all, he found himself stepping into a role he had never imagined: mediator, strategist, and, in some ways, a symbol of hope. The conflict reached its peak during a tense standoff on a neutral world, where representatives from both factions met to negotiate a fragile truce. He stood alongside the officiant and the brides, their presence a reminder of the unity they sought to achieve. The Vryan leader was there as well, their shadowed form as imposing as ever. They spoke with a voice that carried both authority and menace, their words cutting through the air like a blade. You think this union will save you, but it will only hasten your downfall. He stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice steady. You're wrong. This isn't about saving one side or defeating the other. It's about finding a way to coexist. You don't have to agree with our path, but you don't have to destroy it either. For a moment, the Vryan leader was silent, their shadow rippling as if caught in an unseen wind. When they finally spoke, their tone was quieter, almost contemplative. You speak as though you understand the weight of what you've chosen. Perhaps you do. But understand this. Our opposition is not born of hatred, but of necessity. We will not yield lightly. The negotiations were tense, filled with moments of doubt and flashes of hope. But, in the end, a fragile agreement was reached: a promise to step back from the brink of war and seek a path forward through dialogue and compromise. As they returned to the House of Arill, he felt a sense of relief tempered by the knowledge that the journey was far from over. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, he felt a quiet confidence that they could navigate it together. In the weeks that followed, the fragile peace began to take root. The House of Arill and their allies worked tirelessly to rebuild and strengthen the bonds that had been tested. And through it all, he found himself growing into his role, his connection with the brides, and the heart of Arill deepening in ways he hadn't thought possible. One evening, as he stood once more on the balcony overlooking the glowing city, the bride who had become his closest confidant joined him. She stood silently for a moment before speaking. You've come a long way. He smiled faintly, the weight of the journey reflected in his eyes. We all have. She nodded, her glow brightening slightly. And there is still much to do. But together, we can face whatever comes. As he looked out over the city, the lights shimmering like stars against the dark, he felt a quiet resolve take root. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was a path worth walking. And for the first time, he truly believed they could succeed not just for the House of Arill, but for everyone who dared to hope for a better future.